It was much more than a schoolgirl crush for Mandy Boardman when she met a charming man twice her age.
David knew how to make me feel nice and pretty and wanted. He was definitely a good guy.
But Mandy's intense infatuation was obscuring David's disturbing desires.
He's the devil incarnate.
Mandy was absolutely in danger.
And Mandy was forced to make the toughest decision of her life when she discovered how far he would go.
It was monstrous how anybody could just do that.
It was unbelievable. Unbelievable what I saw.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. Mandy Boardman has always thought of herself as mature for her age. Even at 17 years old, she wasn't one to party or break the rules.
I was pretty responsible. I didn't really have time to be wild. I had a job, I had school, I played softball. I grew up a block away from the ball fields, and it was the place to be.
So in the spring of 1996, Mandy was excited to join a co-ed adult softball league within her close-knit Indianapolis community.
At 17, you become an adult when it comes to softball, so you have to join an adult league, and I decided that I would sub for a team, so I would get my fix.
Through the team, Mandy met all kinds of people, including 35-year-old David Wise.
Hi, my name's David. What's your name?
David worked at a shipping company, was a fine ball player, and seemed keen on offering Mandy extra support.
He was much older than me, but he was very nice to me and very polite. He would let me know how he appreciated me being there subbing for the team.
Good catch.
So when David made his true intentions known shortly after Mandy turned 18 by asking her out on a date, Mandy wasn't the least bit put off by their sizable age difference.
He just took me to a local Italian restaurant, and it was very quiet, nice. There was definitely an attraction there, and he always knew how to make me feel pretty and wanted.
Mandy and Dave were kind of an odd pairing, and it might have been because of the age difference. So to me, they were a little odd, but they seemed happy.
Unfortunately, not everyone was as thrilled as Mandy about her new boyfriend.
I was not a happy mommy, not happy at all. And I told her, I said, he's way too old for you. He could be your father. And she said, but he's not, you know, and I was like, well, he could be, so that makes him too old for you.
I always felt my mother was overprotective. It was very normal of her to be concerned about who I was dating, which probably made me want to date him even more.
Mandy knew her feelings for David were different, but she became concerned when she noticed the amount of alcohol he seemed to consume regularly.
I was not a drinker. I did not do that. So being around somebody who was always doing it was just very uncomfortable. So I did tell him, I'm okay if you drink a couple beers every now and then, but the hard stuff had to stop.
You've been drinking way too much.
And to her pleasant surprise, David completely listened to her request.
He stopped drinking. You know, he actually even stopped drinking beer. I felt if he's gonna quit drinking for me, this is gonna be great because he obviously wants to make me happy.
Within a year, it became obvious that marriage was in Mandy's near future.
David and I had spoken about marriage a couple times, and I said to myself, if I was going to get married, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be married forever.
That spring, Mandy wed David in a simple ceremony in front of family and friends, much to Mandy's mother's dismay.
It broke my heart because of the fact that I disliked him. I was really no part of it at all, none. And so I sat in the very last row, and I wore completely black.
It was not very encouraging. But I was in love with him, and we were going to get married, and not hell or high water was going to stop me.
But hell is exactly where Mandy would find herself. And when she slowly uncovered the layers of David's deceptions, it would become clear Mother does know best.
I almost lost my breath.
This is some pretty weird, sick stuff that's going on.
I was just so dumbfounded and shocked. I never thought something like this would happen to me.
In the spring of 1998, Mandy Wise was determined to prove to everyone that her marriage to new husband David was a success.
That's what you do. You get married and you're married forever.
Mandy's not a quitter. She will try to her last breath to keep right on going, and she wanted everything to work out.
And indeed, it seemed it would. When nearly 9 months to her wedding day, Mandy delivered a healthy baby boy. And 1 year later, she became pregnant again, this time with a daughter. But by the time their little girl was born in December 2001, Mandy noticed that David seemed to be falling back into an old habit.
The drinking had gotten to a point where it became more often. People around us started noticing and making comments.
He was more boisterous, more obnoxious. If he was awake, he pretty much had a beer in his hand.
Fine. Fantastic.
Mandy had no clue why David had suddenly gone back on his word to stop drinking and decided to confront him one evening.
What is wrong with you?
I tried to explain to David that not only was I not wanting to accept his drinking,
Promise me.
but I didn't want an alcoholic around my children.
You're so sick. I'm so sick of this.
I'm yelling at him.
What's wrong with you? Nothing wrong with you.
He's yelling back at me, and he smacked me. I was just so shocked. It was definitely a tipping point. He never apologized. And so from that point on, it seemed like arguments weren't just arguments. They were wars.
Soon, Mandy and David were arguing over everything.
David and I didn't have a very great, intimate relationship because I didn't want to do it.
You're so drunk and I don't want to sleep with you.
The attraction was gone. And he would just push and push and push. And so I would finally just be intimate so that we could get the argument over with and move on.
Mandy refused to admit defeat, so over the next few years, she did her best to ignore the husband-shaped elephant in the room. She started her own cleaning company and focused on her kids instead.
I think she wanted everybody to feel like she was in a good marriage. Most of us could see that it was a little rocky.
By 2005, with all Mandy had going on, she wasn't too alarmed when she began feeling incredibly groggy, even after getting a solid night's sleep.
I was finding myself in the middle of the day not being able to keep my eyes open. I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on with me.
There was many, many times that I called there at their house, and he would answer the phone. Well, she's asleep. I said, it's 4:30 in the afternoon. Why is she sleeping?
She's tired. She's been working hard.
But when Mandy began to wake up in the middle of the night with a strange taste in her mouth, she couldn't help but take notice.
It was very bitter, very strong taste that was like stuck there and wouldn't go away.
Mandy's mind landed on the only possible explanation she could muster.
We had a canopy over our bed, and I thought, well, maybe there are spiders up in there, and they're coming down, and they're jumping in my mouth. It's gross. I thought, this is crazy, but what else could it be? David never seemed very concerned. It was like, oh, well, you must be eating spiders.
Go back to sleep.
As the months went by, Mandy continued to feel exhausted. By Thanksgiving 2006, she was notably tired, but looking forward to the holiday.
My father was coming. I was very excited to be cooking for my whole family.
Mandy went to sleep that night feeling happy for the first time in a long time, until she suddenly awoke to a blinding sensation.
I was woken up to a light in my face. But I look, and then I see the light go away, and I watch my husband run away.
What are you doing?
I saw him on the other side of the bed stuffing some stuff underneath the mattress. I'm like, what's going on here?
What is that? Show me. What did you do?
In the fall of 2006, Mandy Wise woke up in a panic when she caught her husband suspiciously hiding something under the mattress.
And I'm like, what's going on here? What are you doing?
Mandy ran over to the other side of the bed and discovered what David had been concealing.
I found this vial and this dropper.
What is this?
The vial has a chalky-looking liquid in it. He pretty much just sat there in silence, like I was some kind of crazy person waking up in a rage.
You are overreacting.
Well, at this time, I had the taste in my mouth, the taste that I had before. So I asked, did you do this?
Have you been putting this in my mouth?
And he's avoiding everything that I'm asking him.
Mandy, you were acting crazy.
After hours of not getting anywhere with David, Mandy decided she needed space.
So I went across the street to Nicole's house to tell her what had happened.
She was crying. She didn't know what to do. I told her I didn't feel that that was right. I would be furious with my husband if he did that to me, because it was very evident he was drugging her. He was giving her something.
A few hours later, Mandy returned home, ready to face David.
I asked him what was in that vial, and he told me that he had crushed up some Xanax to help me sleep. I said, I don't understand why you're trying to help me sleep when I am already sleeping.
You've been giving me sleeping pills. I have been sleeping fine.
And he told me that this is what I needed.
That's why she'd been so tired and lethargic and sleeping so much. And, you know, above and beyond the fact that he did what he did, what if he gave her too much? I just couldn't believe he was doing that to her.
So Mandy made David promise to never take her health into his own hands again.
I just asked him to please kindly stop. He was like, okay, I'll stop.
Won't do it again.
You promised me.
After 8 years of marriage, Mandy wasn't sure what to think.
There were so many things that were going through my head, but I wanted to believe him. I wanted to make my marriage work, so I had to believe him.
So in the winter of 2007, when Mandy awoke to a familiar light shining in her face, she was completely distraught.
I had already been through this, and I felt like I knew what was going on, so I jump up immediately. Well, David takes off.
What are you? Come back here.
Shocked by his audacity, Mandy chased David out to the garage.
Where is it?
I said, show me what's underneath the cushion. And he pulls out the vial and the dropper. I was so angry.
Promise you.
Mandy knew David had been drugging her yet again. The question was, why? As the young mother of 2 children, Mandy wasn't sure what to do next. For the next 3 months, she and David barely spoke as she tried to work out a plan in her head.
I didn't want my kids to know what happened. I had to figure out what was going on here.
But in the fall of 2008, the reason behind all the troubling events became clear.
I was home from work, and David had left his cell phone at home. So I decided I'm gonna go ahead and investigate. So I start looking through his phone, and I'm looking through texts and phone calls.
And the second Mandy opened his videos file, her heart stopped.
What I saw in the videos was nothing that I had ever expected to see in my entire life. It was horrible.
Oh my God.
Mandy didn't have much choice but to show the world what he really was.
In the fall of 2008, after discovering that her husband David had been drugging her in her sleep, Mandy Wise decided to have a look at the videos on his cell phone.
I found 3 videos. I
Oh my gosh.
saw David having sexual relations with me while I was sleeping. I looked like a corpse. It was horrible. It was almost like necrophilia. I thought, how in the world did this happen? I don't remember this.
Then it hit her. This was the reason he was drugging her.
I felt very angry. This whole time, he was lying to me, telling me that I need what he's giving me. Now I finally had proof that something seriously messed up was happening to me. I tried to send them to my email, and I couldn't figure it out on the phone. So I recorded the videos on the phone with the camcorder. That way I knew I had them.
When David arrived home, Mandy was quick to confront him.
His reaction was almost like no reaction. Like he wasn't surprised that they were there.
Mandy no longer doubted what she needed to do next. After 11 years of marriage, she filed for divorce, and David moved out.
It was very hard to take that step to let everybody know that I failed and that my marriage didn't work and break apart my family. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. My kids. They were just devastated.
I thought he was sick and twisted, and I asked her, are you going to take this to the police? And she said, I don't think I can. I don't want anybody to know this. He's gone. It's done. This is not going to happen to me anymore.
By October 2009, Mandy and David's divorce was final. It was difficult for Mandy to acknowledge how wrong she'd been about David.
I feel like there's somewhere where David went off the grid, and people like that are capable of doing anything. And I thought if he could do this to his wife, then he could probably do it to anybody. So I decided to make the phone call to the Indianapolis Police Department.
David Wise was arrested in August 2011 and charged with 1 count of rape and 5 counts of deviant sexual behavior. Without physical evidence, however, he could not be charged with drugging Mandy. David pled not guilty, and on April 28, 2014, after 3 years of legal battles, he went to trial. Along with the video evidence, one of David's own friends testified against him.
David called the wife of one of his friends and made some statements that something was happening to Mandy while she was asleep.
The witness told the jury David said to her that he had no sex life with his wife and admitted to drugging her to have his way.
If she's not gonna get it, I'm gonna take it.
He explained to her that he would do it so that later he could watch the videos and enjoy them during his own time. It was just unfathomable.
Even David himself testified that he had given his wife drugs for 3 years.
He had been prescribed Xanax and Ambien on a number of different occasions. David said he was experiencing lapses in judgment due to drinking.
It was more than enough evidence, and 2 days later, David Wise was convicted on all charges. But much to Mandy's surprise, the judge imposed a light sentence: 20 years with 12 years suspended and 8 years in home detention with a GPS monitor.
I was devastated. This man was able to go home and lead his life. I was terrified.
You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, how can they do that?
The sentence he got was for people with limited or no criminal history. Did I agree with it? I didn't. Spousal rape is a very serious crime, and anytime an adult commits a crime like this, they need to be held accountable.
But 2 months after the sentencing, David failed to charge his GPS monitor for 6 hours.
They found him at home, and he claimed that his battery had just died.
The court found he had violated his home detention rules and revised his sentence to 5 years in prison and 3 years home detention.
I almost couldn't control myself because I just was so grateful for the peace. I felt like it was finally over.
Today, Mandy knows coming forward exposed the ugly truth in her marriage that she fought so hard to hide.
I feel like what I have done has brought attention to spousal rape. And now people are becoming more aware. Everybody needs to know that if you don't give consent, there is no consent.
With everything that she's had to do, I'm very proud of her for coming forward and saying, this is me. It happened to me. I'm very proud of her for that. It takes a lot of courage.
I never thought something like this would happen to me. But I'm definitely still strong-headed. And I want to make sure that whatever I do makes a difference.
Tabitha Howe was as surprised as anyone when she fell for a boy who wasn't exactly her type.
At first, I didn't like Scott, but he made an effort, and we just became very close.
But behind Scott's kind-hearted facade was a manipulative monster.
He was just ranting and raving, and he just looked crazy.
I was scared to death he would come back in and finish what he started.
And when Tabitha opened the mail one day, she'd discover Scott's chilling secret.
It was so unique and so bizarre. Everybody was shocked.
I honestly thought he was going to kill me.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. In the summer of 1998, high school graduate Tabitha Howe was excited to strike out on her own, moving to a house with a great group of friends.
I worked right across the street at the restaurant, and we did what teenagers do. We all hung out, played video games, watched movies. We just had a good time.
But Tabitha's newest roommate, Scott Wellington, didn't seem to fit in.
Scott was working at a grocery store as a bagger, and at first I didn't like him. He was only 17, just a young kid who was arrogant.
Before long, Tabitha was pleased to see that Scott had a charming side.
He seemed like he was caring. He would notice, like, if I did my nails, which most men wouldn't notice. He picked up the house while we were at work. He seemed like a decent person. We just became very close.
Tabitha made it known she was interested in Scott, and they transitioned effortlessly from just friends into a couple.
I felt like maybe this could be something bigger. Maybe we could progress in our relationship and start building a life together. He was my first real love.
They got along well. They would also laugh at each other and tease each other. They were tickled to be together.
Over the next 2 years, Tabitha and Scott found a place of their own and spent every moment together.
We weren't rushing things. I felt I knew who he was. Everything was going pretty good.
But something was about to change all of that.
I found out I was pregnant. I was scared. I was really scared. I knew what it took to take care of a baby.
Tabitha wasn't sure how to tell Scott.
All right, sweetheart, I gotta go to work.
Okay, hon.
You all right? What's wrong?
I'm pregnant.
And he just stopped
What?
and just kind of froze, which made me panic a little.
Okay, you're pregnant. Let's do this thing.
But then he was like really excited about it. He genuinely seemed very happy. And he said he always wanted a family. And I think that Scott thought it was definitely going to be cake and just really fun, and I knew it wasn't like that at all.
9 months later, the young couple welcomed a baby boy.
Scott was a good dad. He was a really good dad. Tabitha was a very good mother. And she was happy, I was happy.
I never wanted kids, but once you hold your baby for the first time, there's nothing else that can take that place.
And by November of 2002, Tabitha had more surprising news for Scott.
I said, "You're going to be a daddy again." And he was absolutely thrilled. We already had one perfect little boy, and now we're going to have another baby.
To financially prepare, Tabitha found a job in the accounting department of a local store.
I was working nights, and Scott was working days. He went on to become a machinist, and he was making decent money. It was enough that we could get by.
But the excitement of another baby was soon eclipsed by a troubling new side of Scott.
Our son was learning to walk, and we had a small shelf up against the wall, and he grabbed onto it to steady himself, and it ended up falling on top of him. He was absolutely fine, but Scott got very angry.
Put this here.
I just thought he was being protective, but I'd never seen him really get angry before.
Then in March of 2003, life took a turn for the worse when Scott announced he'd been laid off from his job. For the next few months, Scott bounced from job to job, but nothing seemed to stick.
I would pick up any available shifts at work, but he did not do anything. He didn't do the dishes, he didn't pick up the house. He was very reluctant to actually get a job and just make some money to help out.
She was very frustrated by, always having to clean up whatever mess that was there.
Finally, in July 2003, in time for the arrival of their second son, Scott found another good job as a machinist in Greenville, just across the New Hampshire state line.
He seemed really happy. He seemed to get a little bit of that spark back and talking like things are going to get better.
But Tabitha would soon learn that with every new high came an unbearable low.
It was a roller coaster ride. I was really scared.
And gradually, Tabitha would be swept into a whirlwind of deception so shocking she wondered if she would even survive.
I was stunned. I couldn't quite wrap my head around what had happened.
You see this stuff in books and TV shows, you don't think it's going to happen to you.
In July 2003, after giving birth to their second son, Tabitha Howe was relieved when her boyfriend Scott Wellington landed a promising new job as a machinist in the quaint town of Greenville.
Greenville, it seemed nice and quiet. It's a small little town. We found a cute little 2-bedroom apartment. It was so close to the post office. We were told we had to get a post office box because the mail delivery service would not deliver our mail. Scott always had the keys with him, and he would always get the mail.
With an additional mouth to feed, the couple began pulling long hours at work to support their growing family. And the stress of rarely seeing each other began to take its toll.
We were kind of like ships passing in the night. It put up a lot of barriers in between us. During Christmas, I would work until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and he would accuse me of being out cheating on him.
Where have you been?
I was at work.
It got to the point where I would have to print out the times that I punched in at work and punched out. I felt like Scott wanted to have complete control over me.
Tabitha was sad, and she just didn't know how to prove to him that she wasn't with other men.
Don't walk away from me.
Tabitha didn't know what to make of this new side to Scott. But even more surprising, one day that December, Scott completely blindsided her.
Scott talked about getting married. It was not something that I have ever wanted. It's just a piece of paper to me. But that's what he wanted. He wanted a real family. So he went and got a ring.
Will you marry me?
Wow.
We had 2 kids. Obviously, this was something that was long-term.
Yeah.
But we never set a date. We just stayed engaged, and I think it was really more in his mind than anything.
And after giving birth to a daughter in 2005, and then another little girl in 2009, it seemed their family was complete.
I knew I didn't want any more kids. 4 was more than enough. Scott was fine with that. It seemed like things were getting a lot better.
Then Scott arrived home one day early from work and dropped a bombshell.
Why are you home from work so early?
I quit.
I was just dumbfounded. And I said, "What do you mean you quit? How are we going to support the kids?"
You know we need the health insurance.
I know that. Just get off my back about it.
It turned into a big fight, and he yelled and he screamed.
As Tabitha took on more hours at work, she struggled to understand why, out of the blue, Scott tossed his family into yet another financial storm. It wasn't until January of 2010 when Tabitha showed Scott a listing for a machinist job at a local company called C&M that he finally took action.
It seemed like a really great company. He called them, he went down for an interview, they ended up hiring him.
Tabitha hoped their troubles were finally behind them. But they were just getting started when Scott made a horrifying decision that would not only devastate Tabitha, but would betray his entire company.
He just sounded like he wanted to destroy her.
I was terrified. He was a completely different person.
In 2010, Tabitha Howe was thrilled when her fiancé, Scott Wellington, landed a solid job, one that enabled him to support their 4 young children, ages 1 through 9. But despite Scott making good money, he seemed to grow more irritable by the day.
We can't afford more than one line.
And before long, his controlling streak returned with a vengeance.
Scott, I really need a phone.
Scott got the home phone shut off, and that's when he really started to isolate me from everybody.
I got her another cell phone, and I paid the bill. He was not happy about that because there was nothing he could do.
And though Scott wanted more control, he didn't seem to want to spend more time with Tabitha and the kids.
He would get up really early and say he was going to work, like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
One time, I brought him to work, and I said, we'll have lunch with you. We'll have a little picnic outside. Oh, no, you can't bring the kids there.
No.
There could be metal scraps in the yard.
This would be dangerous for the kids.
He made it sound like it was concern for the kids.
Then, in December 2010, just in time for the holidays, the pendulum swung again.
I have a little bit of a surprise for you.
He came home and he just started pulling money out of his pockets. And he said that he got a $3,000 bonus from work. I said, really? He said, I helped them get a really big contract. It was fabulous. So I was like, well, it's going to be a really good Christmas for the kids.
But when Christmas Eve finally rolled around, Scott had plans of his own.
Hey, sweetheart, I think I'm gonna take off and hang out with the guys for a little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
I said, just don't be too late because, we have a lot to do. He was like, okay, He gave me a kiss. He left.
Boom! Gotcha.
Tabitha and I were online playing a game. It was just sort of a way to pass the time.
When Scott returned home later that night, it was clear something other than the holiday spirit had possessed him.
I was sitting on the computer. I was chatting with Emmy. And Scott stormed back into the house, just in a rage, just angry, yelling.
I know what you've been doing.
He started to accuse me of cheating again.
You want her? You can let it take her.
And then he picked me up and threw me across the living room.
You could hear the physical tussle. You knew a physical altercation was going on. The microphone just sort of hit the desk with a thump. And then it just went silent. So I sat there, sort of stunned, and immediately started trying to call her.
I was scared. I was really scared. Now all the kids are out of bed. I said, I'm calling the police.
Out of my house. Go!
He took off. I was terrified, and I called my mom.
She called me, crying, and said that he just went off the deep end, and he had just left on foot. She asked me to come up there, and I did.
She finally texted me. She was okay, that her mom was on the way, and that he had left.
Tabitha struggled to understand what had prompted the attack. But when Scott returned later that night, apparently calmed down, Tabitha let him stay.
He seemed legitimately sorry for what had happened.
I'm so sorry.
I didn't really want him back in the house, but it was Christmas Eve. I couldn't let him ruin Christmas for the kids. It's supposed to be a magical time, not the day your father leaves.
But soon what happened that Christmas would be the least of Tabitha's worries when her life took another dramatic turn, one that would end with a chilling discovery.
He's devious, crooked, he's a sociopath.
There's a very small percentage of people that are just absolutely evil. It shocked me.
I was terrified, and I thought, was this his plan all along?
On Christmas Eve 2010, Tabitha Howe was suddenly attacked by her partner of 12 years, Scott Wellington. But she allowed him to come back home, if only for the sake of their 4 young children.
Scott was very quiet when he came back. He seemed legitimately sorry for what had happened, but he never offered an explanation. I made the decision that night that things were completely over between the two of us, and I just needed to figure out what the next step was.
No, Evan, do not touch me.
And 3 months later, in March 2011, Tabitha couldn't take it any longer.
It's over.
We had a really big fight. Everything just came out. I just couldn't handle it anymore. I was all done. I just needed him gone. I threw him out.
Over the next month, Tabitha wanted nothing to do with Scott, but with the children, it wasn't possible.
Scott was supposed to come and see the kids for Easter, and we had agreed upon that.
As Tabitha prepared for the visit, she kept busy by running a few errands.
I was going to the grocery store, and I stopped to get the mail.
Getting the mail had always been Scott's job. So when Tabitha opened their P.O. box, she was floored at the number of unpaid bills. But it was what she found in another envelope that tore her world apart.
There was a card in there, and I figured it's from my grandparents to the kids. I didn't think anything of it, so I opened it up, and it's a sympathy card with some money orders in it. And I start reading it. Dear Scott, we're so sorry for the loss of your wife. You and your kids are in our prayers. I'm like, who is this for? You know, they must have made a mistake. Somebody sent this to the wrong address. I have no idea what's going on. But then I kind of started to wonder, was Scott planning on killing me? Was this his plan all along? I was terrified. Why would he tell people I was dead? I called Scott. I said, don't come and see the kids. Don't come to my house. Don't come anywhere near me.
The following Monday morning, Tabitha spoke with Scott's boss, who was surprised to see her alive and well. As they discussed the circumstances surrounding the card, Tabitha learned the situation was far worse than she imagined. Not only had Scott told his colleagues she'd passed away, he had done so after weaving a year-long tragic tale about a mythical battle with cancer.
Scott told them that I had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and that I was getting sicker and sicker by the day. He then told them that I had to have a double mastectomy and that it wasn't looking good.
In turn, his company had given Scott almost $7,000 in donations to help offset the mounting medical costs, plus several weeks of paid time off. Right around the time Tabitha kicked him out, Scott told his company that she had died.
Certain things started to make sense. He didn't want me to go out. He didn't want me to be seen by people. He didn't want me to bring the kids to work for lunch because I was supposedly sick at home, withering away and dying. He wanted to have complete control over me and isolate me.
That day, Tabitha got a restraining order against Scott, while Scott's boss contacted police and pressed charges.
The owner of the company explained to me he had to report a theft, and the story of the theft was bizarre, to say the least. I had Scott come in for an interview, and he didn't try to lie or deny anything that had happened. He painted the picture that the family was hard on times, and he was trying to make ends meet as best he could. That was his motivation.
Never supposed to get to this level.
Scott was charged with 2 counts of theft by deception, one for the amount of $5,000 and $2,000 for previous donations.
I knew about the $3,000 that he had gotten at Christmas, but the other money I knew nothing about. I don't know exactly what he was doing with it.
On May 16, 2011, Scott accepted a deal and pled guilty to 1 count of theft by deception, claiming he needed the money to support his family.
I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth. He says he did it to support his family. But we didn't see that money.
Scott only spent a few days in jail and was placed on administrative probation.
I realize he didn't kill anybody, but he took advantage of people. I think he should have gone away for a while. I do.
It's absolutely ridiculous. These people were trying to help somebody out who they thought was having a difficult time, and he didn't care. That's sick. Absolutely just sick.
Today, Tabitha still struggles to understand how and why her teenage love turned into such a master manipulator.
Scott was very smart in the way that if he lied to you, he could remember that. And he would continue with that lie for as long as it took. And thinking about not getting married, that was definitely when I knew I made the right choice.
As time passed, Tabitha tried to move beyond all the hurt and devastation Scott caused. She focuses on being a survivor.
Tabitha is fantastic. She's doing very well with the kids. The kids are all good. Every day she gets better and better.
He tried to destroy me, but I'm back to who I originally was, and I believe I'm stronger for it. I have a full-time job. I take care of my kids. I can do this on my own.
The phone rang at exactly 2:17 a.m., slicing through the silence of a small Texas town like a blade through glass, and in that moment, without anyone knowing it yet, a 20-year-old nightmare stirred back to life, dragging with it the echoes of a scream that had never truly faded, the shadow of a figure that had never been named, and a single, devastating question that had haunted a community for 2 decades. What really happened on that humid summer night in 2001 when a young woman walked out of her home and never came back? The town was called Red Hollow, a place so small it barely appeared on most maps, a scatter of dim streetlights, shuttered storefronts, and weather-beaten houses pressed against the endless sprawl of Texas plains, where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets had nowhere to hide, and yet, somehow, the darkest secret of all had buried itself so deeply that no one could reach it. On the surface, Red Hollow looked peaceful, frozen in time, but beneath that stillness lay a tension that never loosened its grip, a collective memory of sirens cutting through the night, of neighbors standing barefoot on their porches, of a name whispered again and again like a prayer that went unanswered. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 23 years old, with chestnut hair that caught the sunlight, a laugh that carried across crowded rooms, and a habit of humming when she was nervous. She worked at a local diner off Highway 87, pouring coffee for truck drivers and retirees, saving every spare dollar with the hope of leaving town one day, of trading dusty roads for distant cities and familiar faces for unknown futures. On the evening of June 14, 2001, she finished her shift at 9:42 p.m., waved goodbye to her coworkers, and stepped into the thick summer heat, unaware that she was walking into the final minutes of her life, as anyone would ever know it. The drive from the diner to her home took 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would later be dissected frame by frame, mile by mile, light by light. Emily was last seen at a gas station near the edge of town, captured in grainy black and white footage that showed her buying a bottle of water and a pack of gum, her face tired but calm, her posture relaxed, no sign of fear, no hint of the terror that waited just beyond the reach of the camera. At 10:03 p.m., she pulled out of the station and headed toward her neighborhood. She never arrived. By midnight, her parents were pacing the living room, their anxiety mounting with every unanswered call. Emily was dependable, predictable, the kind of person who always checked in, who never stayed out without explanation. At 12:47 a.m., her father reported her missing. Within hours, Red Hollow was wide awake, its fragile sense of safety shattered, as patrol cars crisscrossed the streets and search teams fanned out into the fields, calling her name into the darkness, their flashlights cutting thin, trembling beams through tall grass and tangled brush. By dawn, her car was found abandoned on a dirt road 5 miles outside town, the driver's door left ajar, the engine cold, the keys missing. Inside, her purse lay untouched on the passenger seat. Her phone was gone. There were faint streaks of mud along the doorframe, a smudge on the steering wheel, and a single scuffed footprint on the ground, already blurring under the relentless Texas sun. To investigators, the scene whispered of sudden violence, of a struggle too brief and too brutal to leave clear answers behind. The search intensified. Helicopters combed the skies. Volunteers marched shoulder to shoulder across acres of land. Dive teams plunged into murky ponds and winding creeks. For 6 days, Red Hollow held its breath. Then, on the 7th morning, a rancher discovered something tangled in the reeds along a remote stretch of riverbank. The body was identified within hours. Emily Carter was dead. The official cause was blunt force trauma and drowning. The details were sparse, the wounds difficult to interpret, the timeline uncertain. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon, no definitive DNA match. The river had erased too much, and time, even in those first crucial days, was already working against the truth. The case was classified as a homicide, but beyond that, it stalled, sinking slowly into the cold depths of uncertainty, where countless other unsolved cases waited in silence. In the weeks that followed, fear settled over Red Hollow like a thick fog. Parents pulled their children inside before sunset. Doors were locked. Windows were shuttered. Every unfamiliar face was met with suspicion. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some whispered about a drifter passing through town. Others pointed fingers at Emily's ex-boyfriend, a volatile young man with a temper and a history of jealous outbursts. A few suggested something darker, something organized, something too terrible to speak aloud. Each theory flared briefly, then burned out, leaving only more questions behind. Detectives chased every lead. They interviewed dozens of witnesses, retraced Emily's final steps, scrutinized hours of surveillance footage from nearby businesses, and combed through her personal life for anything that might explain why she had been targeted. But the evidence refused to line up. Timelines conflicted. Alibis overlapped. Key moments dissolved into uncertainty. What remained was a jagged outline of events, sharp enough to wound, too incomplete to solve. As months turned into years, the case grew colder. Files were boxed. Evidence was sealed. New detectives skimmed old reports, hoping to see what others had missed, but each attempt ended the same way, in frustration, in resignation, in the quiet acknowledgement that some truths simply refused to be found. Emily's parents aged visibly, their grief etched into every line of their faces, their lives measured in anniversaries of loss. The town learned to live with the absence, but it never learned to accept it. By 2011, a decade after her death, the case was officially labeled a cold case, a designation that sounded clinical, almost merciful, yet carried the unbearable weight of failure. It meant there were no new leads, no fresh evidence, no clear path forward. It meant that justice, if it ever came, would arrive late, perhaps too late to matter. And yet, beneath that quiet resignation, something restless remained, a faint, persistent hum of unease, as though the truth itself were pacing in the dark, waiting for the smallest crack to slip through. That crack would not appear for another 10 years. In the summer of 2021, Red Hollow was preparing for its annual Founders Festival, a modest celebration of barbecues, parades, and fireworks, a brief attempt to recapture a sense of normalcy. Colorful banners hung from lampposts. Children practiced dance routines in the school gym. Vendors set up stalls along Main Street. For a few days, the town seemed almost lighthearted again, its old wounds hidden beneath layers of cheerful distraction. Then, just after midnight, the phone rang. The call came into the county sheriff's office, routed through an anonymous tip line, recorded but untraceable. The voice on the other end was distorted, either by technology or by deliberate effort, its tone low, controlled, trembling at the edges. The caller did not give a name, did not offer pleasantries, did not waste a single second. "I know who killed Emily Carter," the voice said. The room went still. The dispatcher froze, her fingers hovering above the keyboard, every instinct screaming that this was not another cruel prank, not another attention-seeking false lead. The voice continued, haltingly at first, then with mounting urgency, describing details that had never been released to the public, the exact location of the abandoned car, the unusual pattern of injuries, the peculiar knot found in a length of rope recovered near the river. Each fact landed like a blow, tightening the grip of disbelief. When the call ended, there was no return number, no traceable signal, no identity. Only a recording, 12 minutes long, and a name whispered at the very end, so softly it almost vanished beneath the static. The name belonged to a man who had lived in Red Hollow in 2001. A man who had moved away years later. A man with no prior connection to Emily, no criminal record, no obvious motive. A man no one had suspected. Within hours, a small task force was reassembled, drawing together seasoned investigators, forensic specialists, and cold case experts. Boxes were reopened. Evidence was unsealed. Old interviews were replayed, every pause and hesitation scrutinized anew. The past, long buried, clawed its way back into the present, demanding answers it had been denied for 2 decades. As detectives traced the anonymous tip, they uncovered a series of unsettling coincidences, unexplained absences, financial irregularities, a pattern of behavior that, in hindsight, seemed anything but ordinary. Neighbors recalled late-night departures. Former coworkers remembered sudden mood swings. Friends spoke of strange comments, cryptic jokes, fleeting confessions brushed aside as dark humor. Each fragment added weight to a growing sense of dread. But doubt lingered. Memories fade. Stories evolve. And the danger of seeing meaning where none exists loomed large. The investigators knew that to reopen this wound, to raise hope only to dash it again, would be unforgivable. They needed proof. Something concrete. Something irrefutable. For weeks, they worked in near silence, their movements discreet, their questions carefully worded, their surveillance meticulous. They followed financial trails. They cross-checked alibis. They re-examined physical evidence using technologies unavailable in 2001, coaxing microscopic truths from fibers and stains long thought useless. Slowly, painstakingly, the fog began to thin. What emerged was not a single, dramatic revelation, but a web of subtle connections, each thread fragile on its own, together forming a chilling picture. A late-night phone call. A vehicle spotted near the dirt road. A purchase that placed the suspect within minutes of Emily's last known location. A pattern of lies, small and seemingly insignificant, yet consistent, persistent, damning. And still it was not enough. Because the core of the case remained untouched, the final moments, the silent struggle, the question of how a young woman could vanish so completely, so quickly, in a town where everyone watched everyone else. The answer, investigators would come to realize, lay not in the open, not in public records or official statements, but in the fragile, dangerous territory of human conscience, where guilt festers and truth decays, where a single whisper can ignite an inferno. Somewhere, someone had known. Someone had seen. Someone had carried the weight of that night alone for 20 years. And now, at last, they had spoken. As the task force prepared to act on the anonymous tip, as warrants were drafted and surveillance intensified, Red Hollow slept, unaware that the stillness blanketing its streets was about to be shattered, that the past was about to collide violently with the present, and that a door long sealed shut was beginning, at last, to creak open, releasing a cold, relentless wind that would sweep through every corner of the town. exposing secrets that had survived in darkness for far too long. The warrant was signed at 11:36 p.m., the ink still glistening under the fluorescent lights as the last line was completed, and in that moment the weight of 20 years collapsed into a single sheet of paper, thin as a whisper, heavy as a confession, authorizing law enforcement to step across a threshold that had remained untouched since the summer of 2001. Outside, the air hung thick and unmoving, the kind of suffocating Texas heat that pressed against the skin and slowed the breath, as if the night itself were holding on, refusing to let go of its secrets. The suspect's name was Daniel Mercer, 48 years old, divorced, former construction foreman, no criminal record, no documented history of violence. A man who blended seamlessly into every room he entered, whose life appeared to unfold in predictable routines, morning coffee at the same gas station, weekly grocery trips, long solitary drives across rural highways. A man who had lived in Red Hollow in 2001, then left abruptly 6 months after Emily Carter's death, relocating first to Oklahoma, then to a quiet suburb outside San Antonio, where he rebuilt his life piece by piece, leaving behind only faint traces of his former existence. For 2 decades, his name had remained buried in old census lists and forgotten utility bills, never surfacing in interviews, never whispered in rumors, never once flagged as suspicious. And yet, as detectives dug deeper, the illusion of normalcy began to fracture, revealing a pattern of choices that, in hindsight, pulsed with quiet urgency. On the night Emily vanished, Daniel Mercer had clocked out of his shift at a local hardware warehouse at 9:58 p.m. His time card confirmed it. His supervisor remembered exchanging a few words. Nothing unusual. He was last seen pulling out of the parking lot alone, his truck heading west, toward the edge of town, toward the same stretch of highway Emily would have driven minutes later. At the time, this detail had meant nothing. Thousands of vehicles traveled those roads each week. But now, framed by the anonymous tip, it took on a sinister clarity. Investigators reconstructed the timeline with obsessive precision. Emily left the gas station at 10:03 p.m. Daniel's truck was captured by a traffic camera near Highway 87 at 10:07 p.m., moving in the same direction. The margin between them was 4 minutes. For minutes, and an expanse of open road, where darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of headlights. Witnesses were located, memories teased from the depths of long-forgotten nights. A retired trucker recalled being passed by a white pickup driving aggressively, tailgating a small sedan, its high beams flashing impatiently. A woman who lived near the dirt road where Emily's car was later found described hearing the distant echo of a horn, then the screech of tires, then silence, sudden and complete. At the time, she had dismissed it as another reckless driver, another moment of chaos in a world that never truly slept. The pieces, once scattered, began to slide toward one another, their edges fitting with unsettling precision. Forensic analysis brought further revelations. Fibers recovered from Emily's clothing, previously unidentifiable, were re-examined using modern techniques. The results pointed toward a specific type of industrial rope, the same brand sold at the warehouse where Daniel had worked. Purchase records confirmed that he had bought a length of that rope just 3 days before the murder. When questioned years later, he had claimed it was for a home repair project, though no evidence of such a project could ever be found. Financial records painted a similar picture of unease. In the weeks following Emily's death, Daniel had withdrawn nearly all his savings in a series of rapid transactions, then left town without notice, abandoning his lease, cutting off contact with friends, severing ties as though fleeing a storm only he could see. To acquaintances, it had seemed impulsive, a man chasing opportunity. To investigators, it now looked like escape. And yet, suspicion alone was not enough. The law demanded certainty, proof beyond conjecture, evidence that could survive the ruthless scrutiny of a courtroom. And that proof, elusive as it was, lay hidden somewhere in the fragile architecture of memory, in the unguarded moments of a man who had carried his secret for 20 years. Surveillance began quietly. Unmarked vehicles rotated through the neighborhood where Daniel now lived, a sleepy enclave of trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes, where nothing ever seemed to happen. Agents documented his routines, his habits, the rhythm of his days. He woke at 6:12 a.m. He jogged 3 miles along the same route each morning. He bought coffee at the same drive-through window. He spent his afternoons repairing small engines in his garage, a hobby that filled the silence of his solitary life. On the surface, he was unremarkable. But beneath that calm exterior, investigators sensed something brittle, something strained, as though his entire existence were constructed atop a fault line that could fracture without warning. The anonymous caller had provided one final detail, a fragment of information so specific, so chilling, that it could not be ignored, a description of a concealed location, a place where something critical had been hidden long ago. According to the tip, Daniel had buried an item on a remote patch of land outside Red Hollow, a place he believed no one would ever search. That land still belonged to him. The property was a narrow strip of scrubland, purchased years before Emily's death, its boundaries marked by rusted fence posts and fading paint. No structures stood there now, only tall grass, scattered mesquite trees, and the relentless hum of insects. To the casual observer, it was nothing more than an empty field, unworthy of attention. But to the investigators, it represented a chance. Ground-penetrating radar swept across the terrain in slow, deliberate arcs, mapping the unseen contours beneath the soil. At first, the readings revealed nothing but the chaotic textures of natural sediment. Then, near the northern boundary, a disturbance emerged, a subtle anomaly buried nearly 3 feet below the surface, its shape inconsistent with the surrounding earth. Excavation began at dawn. Each shovelful was removed with surgical care, the soil sifted, the progress painstakingly slow. For hours, nothing appeared. Doubt crept in. Had the anonymous tip been a cruel deception? Had they chased shadows for weeks, only to confront emptiness? Then, a glint of metal caught the morning light. The object was small, partially corroded, its surface dulled by years underground. As it was lifted free, investigators recognized it instantly. A compact folding knife, its handle chipped, its blade stained with faint traces of reddish-brown residue. A serial number, still legible, traced it back to a hardware store in Red Hollow. Sales records placed it in Daniel Mercer's hands. Forensic testing would later confirm what everyone at the scene already feared. The residue was blood, and it belonged to Emily Carter. The discovery sent a shockwave through the task force. For the first time, the abstract horror of the case crystallized into tangible reality. The knife was not merely evidence, it was a silent witness, a fragment of a moment so violent and final that it had carved itself into the molecular fabric of steel. With that, the path forward became unmistakable. An arrest plan was drawn up with meticulous precision. The risk of flight was deemed high. The possibility of armed resistance, uncertain. Timing would be critical. Surprise, essential. They chose midnight, the hour when exhaustion dulled awareness, when defenses were lowest, when the weight of sleep made every reaction sluggish. As the operation unfolded, a convoy of unmarked vehicles slipped through the darkened streets, their headlights extinguished, their radios silent. The neighborhood slept, unaware that history was moving among its quiet houses, that justice long delayed was finally on the march. They surrounded Daniel's home in total silence. At exactly 12:41 a.m., a breach team positioned itself at the front door. Another covered the rear. A third monitored the windows. For a brief, suspended moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the knock came. Sharp, commanding, unmistakable. Police. Open the door. Inside, movement. Footsteps. A pause, heavy with indecision. The click of a lock. The door creaked open, revealing Daniel Mercer standing in the dim glow of his hallway light, his face etched with confusion that melted, almost imperceptibly, into something else, something darker, something closer to recognition. Before he could speak, he was in handcuffs. The arrest was swift, clinical, devoid of spectacle. Neighbors slept through it, unaware that the man they passed on morning jogs, the quiet figure who waved politely from his driveway, was now being led away to answer for a crime that had haunted an entire town. In the interrogation room, hours later, the atmosphere shifted. The walls were bare, the lights unforgiving, the silence oppressive. Daniel sat alone at the metal table, his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on a point just beyond the far wall, as though staring into a memory only he could see. Detectives entered one by one, laying out the evidence with deliberate care. The timeline, the surveillance footage, the rope fibers, the buried knife. Each revelation struck like a measured blow, eroding the carefully constructed facade of innocence. His breathing grew shallow. His jaw tightened. Sweat beaded along his hairline. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. Because the truth, when it finally emerged, would not arrive as a sudden confession, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow, agonizing unraveling, a descent into the shadowed corridors of a mind that had lived for 2 decades in uneasy coexistence with its own guilt. And as dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in pale streaks of pink and gold, Red Hollow awoke to headlines that would ripple far beyond its borders, headlines that whispered of a cold case solved, of an anonymous tip, of a shocking midnight arrest, headlines that promised resolution even as they hinted at horrors still waiting to be fully revealed. But the story was not yet complete, because the most disturbing answers, the ones that would forever alter the way this case was understood, lay buried not in the ground, but in the fragile, fractured narrative of that final night, a narrative that, once spoken, would leave no one untouched. The interrogation room was windowless, sealed from the outside world, a cube of dull gray where time seemed to slow, stretch, and warp, where every breath echoed too loudly and every blink felt like a confession. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the metal table, the scuffed linoleum floor, the faint fingerprints smudged along the walls. Daniel Mercer sat alone, shoulders hunched, wrists bound in steel, his reflection fractured in the mirrored glass that concealed unseen observers. 20 years of silence pressed against his chest, heavy, suffocating, waiting for release. Detectives entered without ceremony. No dramatic accusations. No raised voices. Only the quiet certainty of men who had already walked the entire path of evidence and now stood at its end. They laid photographs on the table one by one, sliding them across the cold surface, letting them settle between Daniel's hands like pieces of a shattered mirror. The gas station still, the traffic camera frame, the abandoned car, the riverbank, the knife, its corroded blade dulled by time, yet sharpened by memory. His eyes flicked to each image, then away, as though afraid to linger too long on any single moment. His breathing grew uneven. A muscle twitched along his jaw. "Tell us about June 14th, one detective said quietly. Daniel swallowed. His throat worked, dry and constricted. For several seconds, he did not respond. The silence thickened, stretched taut, vibrating with unspoken tension. "I don't remember," he finally murmured. The words sounded brittle, rehearsed, worn thin by years of internal repetition. The detective did not react. He merely nodded, as if expecting nothing else. "Funny," he replied, "because every piece of evidence says you remember it very clearly." They began to walk him through the timeline, minute by minute, anchoring each event to concrete facts, building a narrative that left no room for ambiguity. His shift ending at the warehouse. The traffic camera capturing his truck. The eyewitness accounts. The purchase of the rope. The buried knife. Each detail tightened the invisible noose, constricting the space in which denial could survive. Daniel's composure fractured in subtle ways. His foot tapped nervously. His fingers clenched and unclenched. A faint sheen of sweat coated his forehead. Yet he remained silent, retreating deeper into himself, as though hoping that if he said nothing, the truth might dissolve. It did not. Hours passed. Water was offered. Food declined. Fatigue crept in, blurring the edges of his resolve. When the detectives returned after a brief recess, their tone had shifted, softening, becoming almost gentle. "You've been carrying this a long time," one of them said. 20 years is a heavy burden." Daniel's lips trembled. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." For a moment, it seemed he might speak. His shoulders sagged, the rigid line of his spine collapsing inward, the posture of a man finally surrendering to exhaustion. His gaze drifted to the far wall, unfocused, as if replaying a scene etched permanently into his mind. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. The room seemed to contract around those words. He spoke slowly at first, cautiously, each sentence extracted with visible effort, like shards of glass pulled from flesh. He described the night in fragments, impressions rather than a cohesive story, sensations rather than sequences. He talked about the heat, the suffocating stillness, the endless stretch of dark road illuminated only by his headlights. He remembered seeing Emily's car ahead of him, its taillights glowing faintly red, drifting slightly within the lane. "She was driving too slow," he said. "I was late. I just wanted to pass." He described flashing his high beams, leaning on the horn, the familiar surge of irritation swelling in his chest. He had been tired, frustrated, restless, the kind of agitation that feeds on itself, escalating without warning. When she didn't pull over, he made a decision he would later insist was impulsive, unthinking, driven by a moment of reckless arrogance. He sped past her, then slowed abruptly, forcing her to brake. The maneuver, intended as intimidation, spiraled out of control. She swerved. Tires screamed. Both vehicles skidded onto the dirt road, gravel sprang into the night. They stopped in a cloud of dust. Daniel said he stepped out of his truck, anger still burning hot, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He walked toward her car, shouting, demanding an apology, demanding acknowledgement. Through the windshield, he saw her face, pale, wide-eyed, terrified. She cracked the window, trying to reason, trying to de-escalate, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he recalled her saying. "Please, I just want to go home." For a brief moment, reality hovered on the brink of normalcy. He could have turned away. He could have returned to his truck. He could have driven off, leaving behind nothing more than a fleeting scare, an ugly memory that would fade with time. Instead, he opened her door. What followed unfolded in chaotic flashes, a blur of motion and sound, a collision of fear and fury. She screamed. He grabbed her arm. She fought back, clawing, kicking, struggling with desperate strength. He stumbled, lost his balance, struck his head against the frame of the car. Pain exploded behind his eyes, igniting a primal rage that drowned out reason. He remembered the knife in his pocket, the one he carried habitually for work. He remembered the sudden, terrible clarity of intention. He remembered the warmth of blood against his skin. Then, silence. He said he panicked, that the enormity of what he had done crashed down on him in a single, paralyzing wave. That he dragged her toward the river, his muscles screaming, his breath ragged, his mind unraveling. He tied the rope around her, the knot clumsy, uneven, born of trembling hands. He pushed her into the dark water, watching as the current swallowed her, carrying her away. When he finished, he stood alone on the bank, soaked, shaking, staring at the ripples spreading across the surface, each one echoing outward like a pulse of guilt. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said, his voice breaking. "I just wanted her to stop." The detectives listened in silence, their faces impassive, their eyes sharp. They had heard countless confessions before, each one shaped by self-preservation, by the human instinct to soften cruelty, to reframe brutality as accident. They knew that the truth, in its rawest form, often lay somewhere beneath the surface of such narratives, distorted by fear and regret. Still, his account aligned with the evidence in chilling detail. The scuffed footprint, the pattern of injuries, the rope knot, the location of the abandoned car. Each element reinforced the grim authenticity of his story. As dawn filtered into the corridors of the station, the confession was recorded, transcribed, preserved. News of the arrests spread rapidly, leaping from local radio to regional television to national headlines. Reporters descended upon Red Hollow, their cameras trained on the streets, their microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. The quiet town, long accustomed to anonymity, found itself thrust into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Emily's parents were notified in person. They listened in stunned silence as detectives recounted the events, the evidence, the confession. 20 years of unanswered questions collapsed into a single, devastating truth. Her mother wept openly, her grief raw and unrestrained. Her father stared at the floor, his face rigid, as though bracing against a physical blow. "We just wanted to know," he said softly. "That's all we ever wanted." For the community, the revelation was seismic. Daniel Mercer's name rippled through conversations, through social media, through whispered exchanges in grocery store aisles and church pews. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the mild-mannered man they thought they knew with the violence now attributed to him. Friends replayed past interactions, searching for signs they had missed, moments that might, in hindsight, glow with ominous significance. Some felt relief. Others felt anger. Many felt both. But beneath the immediate shock lay deeper, more unsettling questions. About how easily evil could hide in plain sight. About how thin the line was between ordinary life and irreversible catastrophe. About how many other secrets, equally dark, might be sleeping beneath the surface of seemingly peaceful towns. As Daniel awaited formal charges, confined to a solitary cell, the weight of his confession settled over him, heavy and inescapable. Sleep eluded him. When he closed his eyes, he saw the river, endless and black, its surface rippling with silent accusation. He heard her scream, again and again, a sound that pierced even the deepest moments of exhaustion. For 20 years, he had outrun the truth. Now it had finally caught him. And as the machinery of justice began to turn, as prosecutors assembled their case and defense attorneys prepared their counterarguments, one reality loomed above all others, unyielding and absolute. Nothing that followed could ever restore what had been lost on that summer night in 2001, and nothing could fully extinguish the echo of a life cut brutally short. The case was solved, but the scars it left behind would never truly fade. The first court appearance took place beneath a ceiling of harsh white lights, their glare flattening every face, stripping away softness, exposing the raw geometry of fear, anger, and disbelief. The courtroom filled before sunrise, benches packed with reporters, townspeople, distant relatives, strangers drawn by the gravity of a story that had already begun to burn itself into national memory. Cameras waited outside like predators, lenses trained on the heavy wooden doors, ready to capture the first glimpse of a man whose name had become synonymous with a nightmare resurrected. When Daniel Mercer was led in, shackles clinking softly against the tiled floor, a murmur swept through the room. He looked smaller than expected, thinner, his shoulders hunched as though the air itself pressed down upon him. His eyes remained fixed on the ground, refusing to meet the collective gaze that bore into him from every direction. In that moment, he was no longer a neighbor, no longer a coworker, no longer a faceless figure blending into the background. He was a symbol, a living embodiment of a terror that had lingered unresolved for 2 decades. The charges were read aloud, each word echoing with clinical precision: first-degree murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence. The legal language felt detached, almost sterile, struggling to contain the enormity of the acts it described. Daniel nodded mechanically, his expression empty, as if the proceedings were unfolding somewhere far away, in a world he no longer inhabited. Across the aisle, Emily Carter's parents sat rigid, hands clasped tightly together. Her mother stared straight ahead, her eyes hollow, dry, as though all the tears had already been spent in private moments unseen. Her father leaned slightly forward, his posture tense, his jaw clenched, absorbing every syllable with the grim focus of a man who had waited half his life to hear them spoken. Outside, the crowd surged. Reporters delivered breathless updates. Headlines scrolled across digital screens. Cold case solved. Suspect in custody. Confession obtained. The words traveled far beyond Red Hollow, igniting debates, speculation, and morbid fascination. Armchair detectives dissected timelines. Commentators questioned how such a crime could have gone unnoticed for so long. Psychologists offered theories. Criminologists analyzed patterns. Everyone searched for meaning, for a logic that might render the horror comprehensible. But inside the Carter family home, there was no such clarity. There was only the quiet weight of absence, the ache of memories frozen in time, the phantom presence of a daughter who would forever remain 23. In the days that followed, fragments of Daniel's life surfaced, each one reframed by the lens of suspicion. Former co-workers recalled his meticulous habits, his insistence on precision, his tendency to isolate himself. Neighbors remembered his politeness, his reserved demeanor, his reluctance to engage in anything beyond superficial conversation. Friends spoke of a man who rarely displayed emotion, whose laughter felt rehearsed, whose eyes seemed perpetually distant. No one could point to a moment that explained everything. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling truth of all. The prosecution assembled its case with relentless focus, layering forensic evidence atop eyewitness testimony, weaving Daniel's own confession into a narrative designed to leave no doubt. They reconstructed the final hours of Emily's life with agonizing detail, mapping her movements, her choices, her unknowing steps toward catastrophe. Each slide displayed in court, each chart and timeline, stripped away abstraction, forcing jurors and spectators alike to confront the reality of her final moments. The defense countered with a strategy built on erosion rather than denial. They challenged the circumstances of the confession, raising questions about psychological pressure, fatigue, and coercion. They scrutinized the forensic methods, probing for contamination, misinterpretation, procedural error. They painted Daniel as a troubled man pushed beyond his limits, a victim of circumstance, a human being undone by a single, irreversible lapse. It was a battle not merely of facts, but of narratives, each side vying to define the story that would endure. As testimony unfolded, witnesses returned to the stand, their memories exhumed, their voices trembling as they revisited scenes long buried. The retired trucker described the white pickup, its aggressive pursuit, the sense of unease that had lingered with him ever since. The woman near the dirt road recounted the sound of screeching tires, the silence that followed, the inexplicable chill that had crept into her bones that night. Forensic experts detailed the microscopic fibers, the DNA traces, the soil analysis that linked the buried knife to the riverbank. And then there were the recordings. Daniel's confession, played in open court, filled the room with his halting, fractured recollection. His voice, stripped of physical presence, sounded smaller, more vulnerable, yet no less devastating. Each admission landed with brutal force, eliciting gasps, sobs, stunned silence. Emily's mother covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Her father stared straight ahead, tears tracing silent paths down his cheeks. For them, the trial was not a quest for justice. It was a prolonged descent into grief, a reopening of wounds that had never fully healed. Outside the courthouse, Red Hollow transformed into a gathering point for media and onlookers, its quiet streets replaced by satellite vans and camera crews. Local businesses hung handmade signs offering condolences. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils. Candlelight flickered across makeshift memorials, illuminating photographs of Emily frozen in youthful smiles, images of a life interrupted, suspended forever in unfinished possibility. Yet even as the trial advanced, unsettling doubts began to surface. Investigators revisiting the early stages of the case uncovered procedural lapses, overlooked leads, inconsistencies in documentation. A potential witness, dismissed in 2001 due to conflicting statements, emerged with a revised account that placed another vehicle near the scene. A partial fingerprint, previously deemed unusable, now appeared marginally viable under enhanced imaging techniques, though its origin remained uncertain. An anonymous letter arrived at the sheriff's office, claiming knowledge of events that contradicted key elements of Daniel's confession. Each revelation stirred unease. Was the story truly complete? Or had the pressure of time, the desperation for resolution, shaped a narrative too neat, too convenient? The prosecution moved swiftly to contextualize these anomalies, framing them as the natural debris of a decades-old investigation, distortions amplified by memory's decay. The defense seized upon them with fervor, weaving them into a tapestry of reasonable doubt, suggesting that Daniel's guilt, though substantial, might not encompass the entirety of the truth. The courtroom atmosphere thickened, tension rising with each passing day. Behind bars, Daniel's mental state deteriorated. He slept little, plagued by vivid nightmares, his waking hours consumed by relentless introspection. He alternated between remorse and resentment, between sorrow and self-pity, his psyche fractured by the weight of what he had done and the irrevocability of its consequences. In rare moments of candor with his attorney, he hinted at details omitted from his confession, fragments of memory too painful, too dangerous to articulate fully. He spoke of other figures that night, indistinct shapes in the darkness, fleeting encounters that blurred into confusion. Whether these were genuine recollections or desperate fabrications remained impossible to discern. What mattered was the uncertainty they introduced. For Emily's family, each new doubt felt like a fresh betrayal, a reopening of the wound they had only just begun to stitch closed. The possibility that the story might be incomplete, that answers might still be missing, threatened to plunge them back into the endless limbo they had endured for 20 years. The town, too, found itself suspended between relief and dread, caught in a paradox where resolution and ambiguity coexisted uneasily. Conversations turned hushed, speculative. Old rumors resurfaced, reshaped by new context. Neighbors eyed one another with renewed suspicion, the fragile trust of small-town life eroding under the weight of unresolved fear. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom pulsed with anticipation. The prosecution prepared to deliver a narrative of singular culpability, of a solitary predator whose moment of rage had annihilated an innocent life. The defense readied its counterstory, one of flawed investigation, coerced confession, and lingering unknowns. Beyond the walls of the courthouse, the world waited. Because this trial was no longer just about Daniel Mercer. It was about the terrifying possibility that the truth, once unearthed, might reveal layers darker and more complex than anyone had imagined, that beneath the surface of a solved cold case, another mystery might still be breathing, waiting, patient, and unseen. And as the jury filed in to hear the final words that would shape the verdict, the air vibrated with a single, haunting question. Was justice finally within reach? Or merely another illusion, flickering briefly before vanishing once more into the shadows? The courtroom fell into a silence, so complete it felt unnatural, a vacuum where even the faint rustle of paper sounded like thunder. As the jury filed back into their seats, their expressions unreadable, their eyes avoiding both the defendant and the grieving family whose lives hung suspended on the verdict they were about to deliver. Outside, clouds gathered low over Red Hollow, thick and heavy, pressing against the horizon, as though the sky itself were bracing for impact. For 3 days, the jurors had deliberated behind closed doors, replaying testimony, scrutinizing evidence, dissecting timelines, each member carrying the private burden of deciding how a story that began 20 years earlier would finally end. They had debated the credibility of the confession, the reliability of the forensic findings, the lingering doubts raised by the defense. They had argued over motive, intent, and the elusive boundary between rage and premeditation. And through it all, they had grappled with a singular, suffocating reality. No verdict could ever undo what had been done. When the foreperson stood, the scrape of the chair against the floor echoed like a warning shot. In the matter of the state of Texas versus Daniel Mercer, the voice began, steady but strained, "We, the jury, find the defendant." A breath was held.
Guilty.
The word detonated inside the room. Emily's mother collapsed forward, a broken sob tearing from her chest as decades of restrained grief finally burst free. Her father closed his eyes, his lips trembling, his hands gripping the bench as though anchoring himself against a powerful tide. Around them, murmurs rippled, shock and relief colliding in a single, incoherent wave. Daniel Mercer did not react. He stood motionless, staring ahead, his face an empty canvas stripped of emotion, as though the verdict had merely confirmed a fate he had long since accepted. Only the faint tightening of his jaw betrayed the turmoil beneath, a silent acknowledgement that the last fragile illusion of escape had finally disintegrated. The sentencing phase followed swiftly. Prosecutors argued for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, invoking the brutality of the crime, the deliberate efforts to conceal it, the decades of suffering inflicted upon a family and a community. They spoke of accountability, of deterrence, of the irrevocable harm carved into the fabric of countless lives. The defense pleaded for mercy, citing Daniel's lack of prior offenses, his expression of remorse, his eventual confession. They described a man undone by a single catastrophic moment, a life defined not by sustained cruelty, but by one irreversible choice. When Daniel was given the opportunity to speak, the room leaned forward, hungry for words that might illuminate the depths of his conscience. He hesitated. For several seconds, he stood in silence, his gaze drifting across the faces before him, the strangers, the reporters, the officers, and finally, Emily's parents. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt insufficient, fragile, almost obscene in their inadequacy. "I can't change what I did. I know that. I can only say that I think about her every day. I think about that night. I think about what my life could have been if I had walked away." He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't, and I will carry that forever." The judge's sentence was swift and absolute: life in prison, no chance of parole. As the gavel struck, sealing the decision, the sound reverberated like a final heartbeat, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, darker journey. Yet even as the courtroom emptied, as reporters raced to file their stories and cameras captured every fleeting reaction, a strange unease lingered, an intangible sense that the truth, though closer than ever before, remained just out of reach. Because in the days following the verdict, new revelations surfaced. The anonymous tipster, whose call had reignited the entire investigation, remained unidentified. Phone records revealed that the call had been routed through multiple encrypted servers, its digital trail dissolving into static long before any origin could be determined. The voice itself, analyzed by forensic linguists, offered no definitive clues regarding age, gender, or regional accent. It was as though the caller had emerged from nowhere, spoken, and vanished again into nothingness. Then, an envelope arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address, no postmark, just a single sheet of paper inside, folded neatly, its edges crisp. Written in block letters were 7 words. He did not act alone that night. The message ignited a firestorm. Investigators reopened files, re-examined evidence, retraced steps they believed long settled. Every witness was revisited. Every scrap of testimony scrutinized anew. The fingerprint once deemed inconclusive was sent to a federal laboratory for advanced analysis. The partial tire track found near the riverbank, previously dismissed as too degraded, was reprocessed using enhanced imaging software. Slowly, faint shadows began to take shape. A second vehicle, its make and model uncertain, appeared in traffic camera footage near the gas station minutes before Emily's departure. A financial transaction, previously overlooked, placed another local resident near the dirt road shortly after the estimated time of abduction. A witness, emboldened by the verdict, came forward to describe seeing 2 figures arguing near the riverbank, their voices raised, their silhouettes indistinct in the moonlight. The possibility of an accomplice, once unthinkable, now loomed ominously close. Public reaction was swift and volatile. Some dismissed the new claims as sensationalism, a desperate attempt to prolong a story already concluded. Others felt betrayed, convinced that justice had been only partially served, that another guilty party might still be walking free. Social media erupted with speculation, amateur investigations, and accusations, the line between fact and fiction dissolving beneath the relentless churn of collective obsession. For Emily's parents, the renewed uncertainty was unbearable. They had clung to the verdict as a fragile lifeline, a promise that the endless waiting had finally ended. Now, that promise seemed once again in jeopardy, unraveling beneath the weight of new doubt. "I don't know how many times we can survive this," her mother whispered to a reporter. "Every time we think it's over, it starts again." In prison, Daniel reacted to the developments with a mixture of agitation and fear. Guards reported sudden mood swings, sleepless nights, episodes of pacing and muttering. When questioned by investigators, he retreated into silence, his previous cooperation evaporating. Whatever he had left unsaid now hardened into an impenetrable barrier, sealed by desperation and self-preservation. But the evidence continued to accumulate. Records revealed that Daniel had been in frequent contact with a man named Lucas Hale in the months preceding Emily's death, a former acquaintance with a reputation for volatile behavior and minor criminal activity. Hale, who had left Red Hollow in 2002, now lived under an assumed name in a coastal town hundreds of miles away. His past was riddled with sudden relocations, unexplained absences, and a trail of unresolved allegations. When investigators finally tracked him down, he denied any involvement, his demeanor calm, almost dismissive. Yet inconsistencies riddled his statements. Timelines shifted, details blurred. His alibi for the night of June 14th dissolved under scrutiny, leaving behind only fragments and evasions. The specter of a second perpetrator crept ever closer. For Red Hollow, the reopened questions reopened wounds, resurrecting the collective fear that had haunted its streets for decades. Night fell heavier now. Conversations ended more abruptly. Doors locked earlier. Trust, once tentatively restored, fractured again. And beneath it all pulsed a singular, chilling realization. The story of Emily Carter was not finished. It had merely reached a new, darker threshold. Because somewhere beyond the prison walls, beyond the courthouse, beyond the glare of headlines and the scrutiny of cameras, the full truth still waited, hidden in the fragile space between memory and denial, between confession and silence, between what had been revealed and what remained buried, patient and unforgiving. The investigation reignited with a ferocity that surprised even the most seasoned detectives, as though the case itself refused to be laid to rest, clawing its way back into the light with renewed urgency. Files that had been sealed were torn open once more. Evidence bags were unzipped. Old maps were unfurled across conference tables, their creases smoothed by hands desperate for clarity. Every detail was re-examined, every assumption challenged, every silence interrogated. The promise of resolution had proven premature, and now the truth demanded more. Lucas Hale became the axis around which the new inquiry revolved. His life, once a blur of unremarkable movements, sharpened under scrutiny. Records revealed a pattern of transient existence, short-term jobs, fleeting relationships, abrupt departures. He drifted from town to town, leaving behind unpaid debts, broken contracts, and unresolved conflicts. In Red Hollow, he had been known as volatile, impulsive, quick to anger, a man who thrived on chaos and confrontation. He and Daniel Mercer had crossed paths repeatedly, their association rooted in shared work sites, late-night drinking sessions, and a mutual attraction to risk. Phone logs from 2001, recovered from long-archived telecom databases, showed a flurry of calls between them in the weeks leading up to Emily's disappearance. Some lasted mere seconds. Others stretched into long, late-night conversations. The content, irretrievable, left behind only the unsettling implication of coordination. Detectives traced Hale's movements on the night of June 14th with painstaking care. He had been officially off the grid, his whereabouts unaccounted for between 9:30 p.m. and 3 a.m., a window of time broad enough to conceal any number of sins. Witnesses remembered seeing his truck parked outside a bar near the highway, then vanishing into the night. A gas station receipt placed him 20 miles south of Red Hollow at 1:12 a.m., but the intervening hours remained a void, a dark corridor through which truth slipped unobserved. As investigators pressed deeper, they uncovered a troubling parallel between Hale and Daniel's confessions. Both men described moments of sudden rage. Both recalled a sense of losing control. Both spoke of fear afterward, of panic, of frantic attempts to erase their involvement. Yet where Daniel's account ended at the riverbank, Hale's potential role lingered in shadow, unspoken, unacknowledged, but impossible to ignore. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Hale's composure began to crack. His voice wavered during interviews. His story shifted subtly, each revision introducing new inconsistencies. He admitted to being near Red Hollow that night, contradicting his earlier claims, but insisted he had left before anything happened. He acknowledged arguments with Daniel, but dismissed them as trivial, the harmless friction of two volatile personalities. Then came the search. Armed with a warrant, investigators combed through Hale's coastal home, a modest structure perched precariously near the shoreline, its foundations battered by salt and wind. Inside, they found little of immediate significance. But beneath the house, buried in a shallow crawl space thick with damp sand, they discovered a small, rusted lockbox. Within it lay fragments of the past. A length of rope, its fibers matching those recovered from the riverbank. A stained cloth, its fabric consistent with a shirt Emily had worn. And a faded photograph, curled at the edges, depicting two men standing beside a white pickup truck, their arms slung casually over each other's shoulders, their faces obscured by shadow. The timestamp placed the image just days before Emily's death. Forensic testing confirmed the worst. Microscopic traces of Emily's DNA clung to the cloth. The rope fibers aligned with those found in the knot recovered near the river. The box itself bore Hale's fingerprints, preserved beneath layers of corrosion. Confronted with this evidence, Hale's resistance collapsed. In a confession that unfolded in jagged bursts, he revealed a version of events that transformed the case from a solitary act of rage into a chilling portrait of shared guilt. He admitted to following Daniel that night, fueled by a volatile mix of alcohol, bravado, and resentment. He described how Daniel's initial confrontation with Emily had escalated beyond control, how he had arrived moments later to find chaos unfolding on the dirt road. "She was screaming," he said, his voice hollow. He was yelling. "I didn't know what to do." Instead of intervening, he had stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and adrenaline. When the violence erupted, when the knife flashed, when blood spilled onto the gravel, he remained rooted in place, a silent witness to an irreversible act. Only afterward, as panic surged, did he move, assisting Daniel in dragging Emily's body toward the river, helping to tie the rope, aiding in the final, horrifying concealment. "I should have stopped it," he whispered. "I should have done something. But I didn't." His confession reverberated like a thunderclap. The revelation of an accomplice reshaped every facet of the case. Daniel's earlier narrative, once viewed as a complete account, now appeared carefully curated, omitting Hale's presence, minimizing shared culpability. The anonymous tipster's warning echoed with renewed significance, their words transformed from vague suspicion into prophetic truth. Legal proceedings shifted once more. Hale was extradited, charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The public reaction was visceral. Outrage flared across social platforms. Editorials condemned the failure to uncover his role sooner. Talk shows dissected the psychology of complicity, the terrifying ease with which ordinary people could become enablers of atrocity. For Emily's parents, the confirmation of a second perpetrator reopened their grief in its rawest form. "It means there were two chances to save her," her father said quietly. "Two chances that were thrown away." Their pain deepened, compounded by the knowledge that the truth had been fractured, concealed, diluted by fear and selfishness. The vision of Emily's final moments grew even more harrowing, populated now by multiple shadows, multiple witnesses to her terror, each one choosing silence over intervention. In Red Hollow, the sense of betrayal intensified. Hale had been known. He had walked the same streets, shared the same bars, laughed alongside the same neighbors. The realization that such darkness had lived among them, unseen, multiplied the town's unease. Trust eroded further. Suspicion seeped into daily interactions, poisoning the fragile bonds that held the community together. As Hale awaited trial, investigators returned to the anonymous call, their determination renewed. They combed through data logs, scrutinized voice patterns, reanalyzed digital trails. Slowly, a possibility emerged, faint but persistent. The caller might have been someone who had known Hale, someone who had carried the burden of his secret for years. A former girlfriend came forward, her voice trembling as she described overhearing fragmented confessions during drunken arguments, half-spoken admissions brushed aside as delusions or threats. She admitted to making the call, driven by guilt, by fear, by a belated resolve to confront the truth. "I couldn't live with it anymore," she said. "Not after all those years." Her confession closed the final circle, binding together the disparate threads of the investigation. The cold case, once a labyrinth of uncertainty, now stood illuminated, its contours stark and unforgiving. And yet, even as justice edged closer, the emotional toll deepened. 2 trials, 2 verdicts, 2 confessions. None of it could restore what had been stolen. None of it could soften the brutality of Emily's final hours. None of it could silence the haunting echo of a young woman's screams swallowed by the dark. As the legal machinery ground forward, as prosecutors prepared to present the full scope of the crime, one truth loomed larger than all others. The greatest horror of that night was not the violence alone, but the human capacity to stand by, to assist, to conceal, and to live for decades beneath the illusion of normalcy. And in that realization, Red Hollow confronted a mirror it would never again be able to look away from. Because the story of Emily Carter was no longer just a tale of a cold case solved. It was a warning, etched into the collective memory of a town, a testament to the devastating power of silence, and a reminder that the darkest secrets often survive not in isolation, but in the shared complicity of those who choose not to speak. The second trial unfolded under an even heavier cloud, as though the air itself had grown thick with accumulated sorrow, with anger layered atop grief, with a collective exhaustion born from years of unanswered questions and the brutal clarity of answers that came too late. Lucas Hale was brought into court in chains, his once defiant posture replaced by a wary, guarded stillness, eyes darting constantly toward the exits, as if every shadow might conceal a threat, every echo might carry judgment. Unlike Daniel Mercer, whose guilt had emerged through a slow, agonizing unraveling, Hale entered the courtroom already condemned in the public imagination. His confession, the physical evidence, the corroboration of timelines and witnesses had stripped him of ambiguity. There was no shock left, only a grim certainty that something monstrous had lived behind an ordinary face. Prosecutors wasted no time. They reconstructed the night in merciless detail, weaving Daniel's account together with Hale's confession, stitching together 2 fractured narratives into a single, harrowing sequence. They described the convergence of 2 volatile men on a lonely stretch of highway, the escalation of a petty confrontation into irreversible violence, the shared decision to silence a witness not with mercy, but with cold calculation. Each word cut deeper than the last, peeling away the last fragile layers of denial. They spoke of choice. Not impulse. Not accident. Choice. 2 men had stood beside a terrified young woman. 2 men had heard her plead. 2 men had weighed the consequences and chosen themselves. The defense attempted to salvage fragments of humanity from the wreckage. They argued coercion, fear, diminished capacity, the paralysis of shock. They suggested that Hale's actions had been driven not by malice, but by panic, by the primal instinct to survive. They painted him as a man swept into a catastrophe of someone else's making, unable to summon the courage to resist. But the evidence refused to bend. Video footage showed his truck circling the dirt road. Soil analysis matched the tread pattern of his tires. The rope fibers embedded in his clothing bore microscopic traces of river sediment. His own words, recorded and replayed, echoed through the courtroom like a relentless drumbeat. I helped him. I tied the knot. I watched her disappear. Emily's parents attended every session. They sat side by side, silent, immovable, absorbing each revelation as if carved from stone. Their faces reflected a complex tapestry of emotions, grief layered with fury, sorrow entwined with exhaustion, hope flickering weakly beneath the crushing weight of reality. For them, the second trial was not a continuation of justice, but an extension of pain, a prolonged immersion in the darkest moments of their daughter's life. When Hale took the stand, the tension reached a breaking point. He spoke haltingly, his voice brittle, his gaze rarely lifting from the polished surface of the table. He described the drive, the drinking, the reckless bravado that propelled him onto the road that night. He admitted to following Daniel, to sensing trouble, to arriving too late to prevent it, and yet, not too late to intervene. I was scared, he said. I didn't think. I just reacted. The prosecutor leaned forward. You reacted by helping him, she replied calmly. You reacted by tying the rope. You reacted by dragging her body. You reacted by hiding evidence. And then you reacted by living your life for 20 years as if nothing had happened. Hale's shoulders sagged. I know, he whispered. The jury watched, their expressions a mosaic of horror and disbelief. They had entered the courtroom expecting to judge a man. Instead, they found themselves confronting the abyss of human moral failure, the terrifying ease with which empathy could be eclipsed by self-preservation. When the verdict came, it was swift and unanimous.
Guilty.
The sentence mirrored Daniel's: life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. As Hale was led away, the finality of it all settled heavily over the room. Two men, two lives now confined to concrete and steel, their futures narrowed to measured steps and counted days. Yet even in the gravity of that moment, the sense of closure remained elusive, a distant mirage shimmering beyond reach. Because justice, though necessary, could not resurrect the dead. In Red Hollow, the trials left a landscape permanently altered. The town's identity became inextricably linked to the case, its name forever bound to headlines and documentaries, to podcasts and true crime forums, to endless analyses and debates. Tourists arrived, drawn by morbid curiosity. Reporters lingered, seeking fresh angles. The community's fragile boundaries dissolved beneath the weight of external scrutiny. Some residents retreated inward, guarding their privacy with fierce determination. Others spoke openly, driven by a need to reclaim their narrative, to assert that Red Hollow was more than a crime scene, more than a cautionary tale. Candlelight vigils became annual rituals, quiet acts of remembrance that transformed grief into collective resilience. Emily's parents established a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and advocating for advances in cold case investigations. They traveled across the country, sharing their story, urging law enforcement agencies to preserve evidence, to embrace emerging technologies, to never surrender to resignation. If someone hadn't spoken, her mother said during one such event, we would still be waiting. Her words resonated far beyond the modest halls in which she spoke, igniting renewed conversations about justice delayed, about the fragile balance between hope and despair, about the lives suspended in unresolved absence. In prison, Daniel and Hale existed in parallel isolation, separated by miles of concrete, yet bound forever by a shared atrocity. Both men withdrew from contact, their days marked by routine, their nights haunted by memory. Guards reported episodes of panic, of whispered apologies uttered to empty cells, of hands trembling beneath thin blankets. Neither found peace. And yet, even as the machinery of justice ground inexorably forward, as sentences were served and appeals exhausted, an unsettling awareness persisted. This case, for all its resolution, offered no simple lessons. It revealed no singular cause, no clear warning signs, no comforting logic. It exposed instead the fragile, volatile nature of human behavior, the terrifying potential that lay dormant within ordinary lives, waiting only for the right convergence of circumstance to awaken. A traffic dispute, a moment of rage, a choice not to walk away. From these unremarkable beginnings, a tragedy unfolded that would reverberate across decades, reshaping countless lives, imprinting itself upon a town's collective consciousness. As the years passed, Emily Carter's story became both a memorial and a warning, a reminder that beneath the surface of routine, beneath the illusion of safety, danger could lurk in unexpected forms. Her name echoed in classrooms, in town halls, in community gatherings, a symbol of loss, resilience, and the enduring quest for truth. And still, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world held its breath and shadows stretched long across empty streets, Red Hollow remembered. It remembered the night when a young woman vanished. It remembered the decades of waiting. It remembered the voice that finally broke the silence. And in that remembering, it carried forward a solemn vow that no disappearance would ever again be met with indifference, that no unanswered question would ever again be allowed to fade quietly into darkness. Because the cost of forgetting, the town had learned, was far too high. And the echoes of that lesson would linger, long after the final headlines had faded, long after the courtroom doors had closed, long after the river had carried away the last visible traces of a crime that refused, for 20 long years, to be forgotten. Time did what it always did. It moved forward, indifferent to grief, to justice, to the fragile architecture of human healing. Seasons changed. Headlines faded. New tragedies replaced old ones in the endless churn of public attention. Yet in Red Hollow, the story of Emily Carter did not recede. It settled instead into the bedrock of the town's identity, a low, constant hum beneath everyday life, a memory that pulsed quietly in the background of every conversation, every gathering, every moment of silence. The trials had ended, but their aftermath lingered in ways no verdict could contain. Emily's parents returned to a house that no longer felt like home. Every object bore the imprint of absence. The empty bedroom, preserved in a state of suspended time. The faded photographs lining the hallway. The quiet corners where laughter once echoed. Grief, they discovered, was not a storm that passed, but a climate that reshaped the entire landscape of living. They learned to move through it, to breathe within it, to carry its weight without collapsing beneath it. They threw themselves into advocacy, into purpose, into the desperate need to ensure that no other family would endure what they had. Their foundation grew, drawing support from across the nation, funding cold case units, forensic research, and public awareness campaigns. They spoke tirelessly, not as symbols, but as parents, grounding every statistic in human loss, every procedural failure in lived suffering. Yet even as they worked to transform tragedy into action, they were haunted by unanswered questions. Not about who had done it, but about why. Why that night? Why that moment? Why their daughter? No confession, no trial, no sentence could fully illuminate the internal storm that had converged on a lonely Texas road and erupted into irreversible violence. The absence of motive remained a void at the center of the narrative, an empty space where meaning refused to form. Psychologists who studied the case described it as a convergence of situational volatility and latent aggression, a perfect storm of frustration, alcohol, ego, and impulse. But such explanations felt sterile, distant, inadequate. They explained behavior without touching the raw, emotional core of what had been lost. For Red Hollow, the case became a mirror. Residents looked inward, questioning assumptions about safety, about familiarity, about trust. They examined the quiet rituals of their lives, the casual greetings, the shared meals, the unspoken understandings, and wondered how darkness could hide so seamlessly among them. How a neighbor could carry such a secret. How ordinary interactions could coexist with unspeakable violence. Community meetings grew more frequent. Neighborhood watch programs expanded. Youth outreach initiatives took root, aiming to channel anger, isolation, and frustration into dialogue and connection. The town tried, in its own imperfect way, to heal itself by strengthening the bonds that tragedy had frayed. But healing was neither linear nor uniform. Some residents recoiled from the renewed attention, resenting the way their home had been transformed into a symbol of horror. Others leaned into it, embracing the opportunity to redefine Red Hollow as a place of resilience rather than fear. Tension simmered beneath polite exchanges, an undercurrent of unresolved emotion that occasionally erupted into open conflict. For the younger generation, Emily's story became legend, a cautionary tale recounted in hushed tones, a shadow cast over adolescence. Parents tightened curfews. Teachers incorporated awareness programs into curricula. Police officers spoke at assemblies, urging vigilance, responsibility, empathy. Yet, even as protective measures multiplied, an uncomfortable truth persisted. No system, no policy, no warning could fully insulate a community from the unpredictability of human behavior. Beyond Red Hollow, the case reverberated through the broader criminal justice landscape. Cold case units across the country cited it as proof of the power of renewed investigation, of technological advancement, of anonymous tip lines. Law enforcement agencies revisited dormant files, spurred by the realization that resolution could emerge even after decades of silence. Families of missing persons reached out, hopeful that their own stories might yet find answers. The ripple effects were profound. Advancements in forensic genealogy accelerated. Databases expanded. Evidence preservation protocols were tightened. Training programs emphasized the importance of long-term case viability. The legacy of Emily Carter extended far beyond the boundaries of her town, influencing the future of criminal investigation in ways few could have imagined. And yet, for all its impact, the case remained deeply personal. In prison, Daniel Mercer and Lucas Hale confronted the slow, relentless passage of time from within concrete walls. Their lives narrowed to regimented routines, their days measured by counts and schedules, their nights haunted by memory. Daniel withdrew almost entirely, speaking rarely, his letters infrequent, his voice subdued. He spent hours in the prison library, not reading for pleasure, but for distraction, burying himself in pages to escape the relentless replay of that night. Guards observed long stretches of motionless stillness, as though he were suspended in perpetual contemplation, trapped within an internal loop of regret. Hale, by contrast, oscillated between volatility and despair. His temper flared unpredictably. His sleep fractured into restless fragments. He muttered to himself, arguing with unseen adversaries, reliving moments he could neither rewrite nor forget. Mental health evaluations documented deepening depression, persistent anxiety, and a growing detachment from reality. Neither found redemption. Neither found peace. Their punishment extended far beyond confinement, into the intimate spaces of memory and conscience, where the past replayed endlessly, unbound by walls or bars. Years passed. The riverbank where Emily's body had been found slowly reclaimed its quiet anonymity. Vegetation thickened. Footprints faded. Nature erased the visible scars of violence, indifferent to the human tragedy that had once unfolded along its edge. Only a modest plaque, placed discreetly among the reeds, bore witness to what had occurred, its inscription simple, its presence solemn. Visitors came occasionally, leaving flowers, notes, small tokens of remembrance. They stood in silence, gazing at the water, imagining the final moments of a life extinguished too soon. Some wept. Others prayed. All departed changed, carrying with them a fragment of sorrow that lingered long after they left. For Emily's parents, the river remained an unbearable boundary, a place they could not bring themselves to visit. Their grief existed not in geography, but in memory, in the countless moments they would never share, the milestones that would forever remain hypothetical. Birthdays, weddings, children. Each imagined future formed a constellation of loss, shining brightly against the dark canvas of absence. And yet, amid the enduring sorrow, something else emerged. a quiet resilience, a stubborn refusal to allow tragedy to define the entirety of their existence. They celebrated Emily's life, not only her death. They told stories of her kindness, her humor, her dreams. They shared photographs of her smiling beneath open skies, of her dancing at family gatherings, of her laughter caught mid-motion. In doing so, they reclaimed her narrative, rescuing it from the shadow of violence. Gradually, the community followed suit. Memorial events evolved from somber vigils into celebrations of life. Music filled the town square. Children painted murals. Stories replaced silence. The weight of grief, though never lifted, shifted, becoming something that could be carried rather than endured. Still, on certain nights, when the air hung heavy and the streets lay empty, the past seemed to stir. In those quiet hours, the story of Emily Carter resurfaced in whispered conversations, in solitary reflections, in the soft ache of unresolved longing. It reminded Red Hollow that healing was not an endpoint, but a continuous process, a daily act of courage and remembrance. And in that fragile balance between memory and hope, the town persisted. Because the true legacy of the case was not the violence that ended a life, nor even the justice that followed, but the collective determination to ensure that such darkness would never again be allowed to pass unnoticed, unheard, or unchallenged. In the end, the cold case solved had become something larger than itself. It had become a testament to the power of truth, to the cost of silence, and to the enduring strength of those who, even after unimaginable loss, continue to choose life, light, and the fragile promise of tomorrow. After nearly 2 decades buried in silence, a single witness has finally shattered one of Sydney's most haunting cold cases. For years, investigators believed the truth had vanished along with the victim. Leads went cold. Files gathered dust. Suspects walked free. But everything changed when an unexpected voice stepped forward. The witness, who had remained hidden out of fear, revealed chilling details only the killer could know. Timelines suddenly aligned. Long-forgotten evidence took on new meaning. Within hours, detectives reopened sealed records, re-examined forensic samples, and reconstructed the night that had baffled police since 2005. What they uncovered was devastating. A suspect long considered untouchable now found himself cornered by irrefutable testimony. Surveillance was launched. Warrants were issued. And as the net tightened, it became clear there was nowhere left to run. For a city haunted by unanswered questions, justice was finally within reach. The call came in just after midnight, a whisper sliding through the static of a long-forgotten line, a voice thin and trembling, carrying the weight of a secret that had been buried for more than 20 years, a secret that refused to stay dead, a confession without a name, a fragment of truth that would ignite a chain reaction no one could stop, because somewhere in Toronto, a city that never truly sleeps, a file-stamped cold case had just begun to burn again, and the ashes of a brutal crime from 2003 were about to scatter across the present like a storm of broken glass, cutting into lives that thought they were safe. It started on a winter night in late November, the air heavy with freezing fog and exhaust, the streets slick and gleaming under yellow streetlights, when a young woman named Clara Whitmore failed to arrive home after her late shift at a downtown cafe, her phone ringing unanswered, her apartment dark, her bed untouched, her coat still hanging by the door, and by morning, panic had already spread through her small circle of friends like a virus, sharp and unstoppable, because Clara was the kind of person who always called, always texted, always checked in, and silence, in her world, was a scream. The search began with urgency, patrol cars sweeping alleyways, transit officers scanning security feeds, volunteers forming nervous lines along icy sidewalks, their breath clouding the air as they called her name into the darkness, while her family waited in a small, fluorescent-lit room at police headquarters, staring at a photograph of her taped to the wall, a simple portrait that now carried the terrible weight of uncertainty, her eyes bright, her smile soft, her future suspended in a moment that refused to move forward. 2 days later, her body was found in an abandoned industrial lot near the edge of the city, hidden beneath warped sheets of rusted metal and broken pallets, the ground stained dark, the cold preserving details that no one wanted to see, and in an instant, hope collapsed into horror because the evidence told a story of violence, of fear, of a struggle that had ended in silence, and the city recoiled. Headlines exploding across morning papers, radio hosts lowering their voices, neighbors locking doors that had never felt fragile before. Detectives flooded the scene, cameras flashing, gloved hands tracing the outlines of chaos. Every footprint, every fiber, every drop of blood carefully mapped and catalogued. Yet even in those first crucial hours, there was a sense of something slipping away, a vital clue dissolving into the freezing air because the lot was exposed, open, vulnerable to contamination, and the killer, whoever they were, had chosen a place where time and weather would be their accomplices. The investigation surged forward with relentless speed. Dozens of interviews, hundreds of tips, surveillance footage combed frame by frame, taxi logs analyzed, phone records subpoenaed, and still, the answers remained just out of reach, as if the truth itself were deliberately stepping backward, retreating into shadow, and every time detectives believed they were closing in, the trail fractured, splintered, vanished. Suspicion fell first on the people closest to Clara, the inevitable circle of scrutiny tightening around friends, co-workers, former partners, anyone whose proximity could be twisted into motive, and lives were torn open under the harsh glare of interrogation rooms, alibis dissected, relationships questioned, secrets forced into the light. But one by one, they were cleared, each lead collapsing under the weight of inconsistent timelines and insufficient evidence, leaving behind only exhaustion and a growing sense of dread. Then came the anonymous tips, dozens of them, wild and contradictory, voices from the shadows offering names, rumors, half-remembered sightings, all of it pouring into a system already drowning in uncertainty, and for months, detectives chased every possibility, from transient workers to organized crime whispers, from jealous lovers to chance encounters gone wrong, but nothing held, nothing endured, and the case began its slow descent into silence. By the end of the first year, the investigation had grown cold, not in the official sense, but in the way hope drains quietly from a room, leaving behind a hollow echo, the file thick with unanswered questions, the evidence sealed, the faces of detectives etched with frustration, and the Whitmore family left to navigate a new reality defined by absence, their lives forever divided into before and after. Years passed, and the city changed, new buildings rising where old factories once stood, cafes closing, streets renamed, memories fading, yet Clara's name lingered like a ghost, resurfacing every anniversary, every documentary, every whispered conversation that ended with the same haunting question: who did this, and how did they get away with it? The truth was, someone had always known. Someone had carried the weight of that night like a hidden scar, and in the quiet spaces between decades, guilt had a way of sharpening, pressing inward, demanding release, and when the call finally came, when the words were finally spoken, they detonated inside a system that had long ago learned to expect nothing, and yet, suddenly, everything was possible again. The tip was brief, fragmented, but precise, naming a man who had once been interviewed and dismissed, a man whose alibi had seemed solid, whose life had unfolded in plain sight, unremarkable, almost invisible, and yet, within that ordinary existence, there was a fracture, a moment of unexplained absence, a missing piece that had never fully aligned, and as detectives reopened the file, they felt the familiar tightening in their chests, the instinct that told them something was different this time. Evidence was pulled from storage, boxes cracked open, envelopes unsealed, and among the preserved fragments was a small, overlooked biological sample collected from beneath Clara's fingernails, too degraded at the time to yield definitive results, now re-examined under technology that did not exist in 2003, machines capable of extracting stories from molecules, of turning microscopic traces into undeniable truths. Days stretched into weeks as technicians worked in sterile labs, their movements precise, their eyes fixed on glowing screens, while detectives waited, pacing corridors, replaying old interviews, scrutinizing transcripts, searching for the moment they might have missed, and when the results finally arrived, they landed with the force of an earthquake. The DNA matched. Not to a known offender, not to a database hit, but to a familial connection, a partial profile that pointed outward, toward a family tree that branched into dozens of possibilities, and suddenly, the investigation exploded into motion once more, a web of relationships mapped across decades, genealogists tracing bloodlines, detectives knocking on doors, asking questions that reopened wounds long sealed. And somewhere within that expanding network, the killer's identity began to sharpen. Each step forward tightened the net, narrowing possibilities, closing escape routes, until one name remained. A man who had lived quietly on the outskirts of the city, who had built a life defined by routine and predictability, who had raised children, attended barbecues, paid taxes, and slept each night beneath the illusion of safety, never knowing when the past would reach up and drag him back into the light. Surveillance began in silence, unmarked vehicles lingering at a distance, cameras capturing the mundane rhythms of his days, detectives studying his movements, his habits, his interactions, searching for cracks, for signs of the violence buried beneath decades of restraint, and in those quiet observations, a chilling realization emerged. He was careful, meticulous, a man who had learned to live with his secret by controlling every visible detail. But secrets have gravity, and they pull relentlessly toward exposure. As investigators prepared to confront him, they revisited the night of Clara's disappearance, reconstructing her final hours, mapping her walk from the cafe, the route she always took, the shortcut she trusted, and in that reconstruction, a terrifying clarity took shape, revealing how an ordinary path had intersected with extraordinary evil, how a fleeting encounter had become a death sentence, and how chance, in its most brutal form, had chosen its victim without warning. The warrant was signed just before dawn, the sky barely lightening over the city, and a tactical unit assembled in silence, their boots heavy against concrete, their radios crackling with low, urgent murmurs as they converged on a modest suburban home, a place that looked indistinguishable from any other, with trimmed hedges, a driveway dusted with frost, a porch light glowing softly against the darkness. Inside, the man slept, unaware that time had finally run out, that the lies he had layered over his life were about to collapse, and as officers took their positions, fingers tightening around triggers, the weight of 22 years pressed down on every breath, because this moment, this single knock, carried the hopes of a family, the memory of a lost young woman, and the possibility of justice delayed, but not denied. The door would open, and nothing would ever be the same again. But before that moment arrived, before the shattering of a carefully constructed life, there remained one final, unbearable question, hanging in the frozen air like a suspended blade. Why, after all this time, had the truth finally chosen to surface, and what darkness had kept it hidden for so long? And in the stillness before impact, Toronto held its breath. The knock came like a thunderclap in the quiet suburb, a single, deliberate jar against the front door that tore through the fragile peace of early morning, jolting the man awake in a tangle of half-remembered dreams, his heart instantly racing, a primal awareness flooding his senses before logic could catch up, because somewhere deep inside him, buried beneath years of routine and denial, a voice had always known this moment would arrive. For 22 years, he had lived with the tension of an invisible countdown, every knock on the door, every unexpected phone call, every unfamiliar face in a crowd triggering a reflexive surge of fear, and now, in the dim light of dawn, that fear crystallized into certainty. Police, a voice called calm, controlled, final. There was no escape, no back door, no time, just the weight of the past pressing forward, demanding to be acknowledged. As officers flooded the narrow hallway, hands guiding him into handcuffs, the house seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as if the building itself were recoiling from the truth it had sheltered for so long. Photographs lined the staircase. Birthdays, graduations, family vacations, moments frozen in artificial happiness, each image now contaminated by the knowledge of what had preceded it, of the life built upon a foundation of violence and deceit. His wife stood frozen in the kitchen, a coffee mug slipping from her grasp, shattering against the tile, the sound sharp and sudden, echoing through the space like a gunshot, while his children stared in confusion, their faces a collision of fear and disbelief, unable to reconcile the man they knew with the words being spoken. Outside, the sky was slowly turning pale, the city awakening unaware, traffic beginning to hum, radios flickering to life, and somewhere downtown, detectives waited, their eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles, their minds racing through the decades that had led to this moment, each of them carrying their own private history with the case, the sleepless nights, the missed holidays, the quiet frustration of unanswered questions. In the interrogation room, the air was thick, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the walls bare, the table cold beneath his wrists, and as the door closed behind him, sealing him inside, the illusion of control he had cultivated for so long began to fracture. His breathing quickened. His eyes darted. Every small movement betrayed the tension coiled inside his body, a tension that had never truly left, only learned to hide. Detectives entered slowly, deliberately, their presence steady, unhurried, because time was finally on their side. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, not with aggression, but with precision, reconstructing the past in fragments that accumulated into an inescapable whole. The DNA match, the genealogical trail, the witness statements newly reevaluated, the overlooked inconsistencies in his original alibi. Each detail was delivered with surgical calm, and with every revelation, the room seemed to tighten, the space between denial and confession narrowing until there was nowhere left to stand. At first, he resisted, offering familiar deflections, half-truths, carefully rehearsed denials, but the words fell flat, hollow against the weight of science and time. His voice wavered. His posture collapsed. And then, in a moment so quiet it almost went unnoticed, his shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him like water from a cracked vessel. He stared at the table, his reflection warped in its polished surface, and when he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. The story that emerged was one of impulse and opportunity, of a chance encounter spiraling into irreversible catastrophe, of a man whose ordinary frustrations and private resentments had fused into a single, violent decision. He described the night with unsettling clarity, the flicker of streetlights across wet pavement, the muffled sounds of traffic, the echo of footsteps behind him, the moment he realized she was alone. There was no grand plan, no elaborate scheme, just a convergence of circumstances and a willingness to cross a line that most people never approach. He spoke of panic afterward, of the frantic attempt to erase his presence, of washing blood from his hands in a public restroom, of discarding clothing in dumpsters across the city, of returning home to a sleeping family and lying awake until dawn, rehearsing the story he would tell if anyone ever asked. And for years, no one did. The silence became his shield. The passing seasons, his camouflage. When the confession ended, the room remained still, the weight of it lingering in the air like smoke. Detectives exchanged glances, a mixture of grim satisfaction and sorrow, because closure, when it finally arrives, rarely feels like victory. It feels like exhaustion, like grief, like the quiet acknowledgement of a life lost and a lifetime stolen. News of the arrest detonated across Toronto within hours. Headlines screamed. Social media erupted. Television crews crowded sidewalks outside police headquarters, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing, commentators dissecting every detail, every photograph, every fragment of information. The phrase "cold case breakthrough" pulsed across screens, a testament to persistence and technological progress, but beneath the spectacle lay a deeper, more unsettling realization that a killer had lived among them, unnoticed, unchallenged, for more than 2 decades. For Clara's family, the news landed with devastating complexity. There was relief, yes, a measure of long-awaited justice, but also a fresh surge of grief, because the past, once reopened, refused to stay contained. Her mother collapsed into tears when she heard the name, a stranger who suddenly occupied an intimate place in their history, her father staring silently at the wall, his hands trembling, while her younger brother, now older than she had ever been allowed to become, felt the years fold inward, compressing time until the loss felt as raw as it had on the day she vanished. They gathered photographs and memories, stories and fragments of a life interrupted, preparing themselves to speak, to testify, to face the man responsible, and in that preparation, they confronted a painful truth, that no verdict, no sentence, no public reckoning could ever restore what had been taken. As the legal process began, the case file expanded once more, this time with the clarity of hindsight, detectives re-examining early missteps, the subtle errors and missed connections that had allowed the killer to slip through their fingers. They studied the fragile alibi that had once shielded him, the misplaced trust in circumstantial accounts, the technological limitations that had rendered crucial evidence silent. Each discovery stung, but each also reinforced a sobering reality, that justice is not a single moment, but a fragile chain of decisions, each link vulnerable to human fallibility. In court, the man appeared diminished, smaller somehow, his confidence eroded by the relentless exposure of truth. His family sat behind him, their faces etched with disbelief and betrayal, grappling with the dual reality of loving someone capable of unimaginable harm. They listened as prosecutors reconstructed the night of the murder, step by step, the sterile language of law transforming into a brutal narrative of fear and violence, and with every word, the distance between the present and 2003 collapsed, the courtroom becoming a vessel through which the past surged back into being. Witnesses testified. Experts explained. The DNA evidence was displayed, its molecular certainty slicing through any remaining doubt, and as the trial progressed, public attention intensified, the city collectively reliving a crime it had long tried to forget. Memorials appeared near the site where Clara's body had been found, candles flickering against the cold, handwritten notes curling at their edges, strangers leaving flowers, messages, apologies, as if trying to bridge the impossible gap between empathy and loss. Yet beneath the surface of resolution, questions lingered, unsettling and persistent. How many other cases remained buried, waiting for a technological miracle or a guilty conscience to awaken them? How many killers had learned to blend seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary life? How many families still waited, suspended in a purgatory of not knowing? The Toronto case became a symbol, a testament to the power of modern forensics, but also a stark reminder of time's merciless passage. 22 years had slipped away. A generation had grown. A life had ended. And only now, in the echoing corridors of a courthouse, did the full truth finally stand exposed. As the verdict was read, a hush settled over the room, the words heavy, irrevocable.
Guilty.
The sentence followed, long and final, and with it, the formal conclusion of a story that had never truly paused. The man was led away, the door closing behind him with a muted thud, and in that sound, there was no triumph, only the somber punctuation of inevitability. Outside, the city continued its restless motion, cars streaming through intersections, pedestrians weaving through crowds, the machinery of daily life grinding forward, indifferent to individual tragedy, yet forever altered by the knowledge of what had unfolded within its boundaries. And in the quiet aftermath, as cameras packed up, as reporters moved on, as the public's attention drifted toward newer crises, the memory of Clara Whitmore remained, suspended between past and present, a reminder that even when truth finally surfaces, it does not erase the darkness that preceded it. It only illuminates the shadows, leaving behind a lingering question that no amount of justice can fully answer. How does a city, a family, a soul, move forward after learning how long it has lived beside a lie?